Hey, it's Camila Stevenson, and around here we talk wealth. And I want to address something right away that people are saying, which is assets are being repriced or that certain things are suddenly becoming more valuable. And I think that framing is actually missing what's really happening. I don't think the biggest change right now is the price of assets. I think the bigger issue is that the measuring stick which we're using to judge value is no longer stable enough to tell the truth. And when the measuring stick starts to change, everything you measure with it starts to look a little confusing. So people end up arguing about outcomes instead of asking better questions, which is what are we actually measuring with? Because if the unit you're using to measure value is drifting or expanding and losing consistency, then the conclusions you draw from it are going to feel a bit chaotic, even if the system itself is behaving logically. That's what I want to walk through today. Not any predictions or hype, not buy this, sell that, but just how value actually forms when systems are under stress and why so many things feel like they're being redefined all at once. And I promise you, you need to understand this if you are trying to get wealthy. And we're entering into a stage in 2026 where everything is about to change. There is a global reset hidden. But first, before I go any further, I want to give a quick disclaimer and say this is not financial advice. Don't go and do anything just because I said I did it or I believe in it. This is for educational purposes only. This is for entertainment purposes. I do want to walk you through how I'm thinking about what's happening so that you can decide how you want to think about it for yourself. And if you appreciate this kind of conversation, the macro side, the system side, the stuff that actually explains why things move, then go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're not subscribed already, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss a video. Now, listen, I want to walk through some things that I think is tripping people up a bit. And one of the things that we're taught is almost subconsciously to treat price as truth. If something costs more, we assume it's worth more. If something costs less, we assume it's less important. And that works fine in a world where the currency itself is stable. But let me tell you something. We don't live in that world anymore. We live in a system where money isn't backed by anything physical, where supply expands constantly, and where purchasing power quietly erodes over time. So the number attached to something doesn't carry the same meaning it used to. And I think that's why people feel so disoriented right now because they're looking at prices and saying, this doesn't make sense when the real issue is that price has become a distorted signal. If the unit you're measuring with is stretching, then the object didn't suddenly change, your measurement did. And when that happens, people start arguing about whether something is overvalued or undervalued, when the more honest question is overvalued compared to what? Compared to a currency that's losing purchasing power, compared to a system that's accumulating more debt than it can service, compared to a world where stress events are becoming more frequent, not less. This is where value starts to shift away from theory and toward necessity. When everything is calm, people optimize for efficiency. That's just something that happens naturally. But when things get a little tight, people optimize for reliability. And that shift really do happen quietly at first. What matters isn't what looks good on paper, it's what actually works when there is friction, delay, or pressure in a system. And that's why when stress shows up, value migrates, not towards what's the most popular or what's fashionable, but towards what reduces uncertainty. And this is the part that I think a lot of people are still underestimating. Systems don't pause and ask permission when they're under pressure. They don't wait for consensus. They don't care whether a move makes sense emotionally. They respond to necessity. And once necessity becomes the driver, things that were ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood can suddenly matter a lot very quickly. That doesn't mean everything is going up right away and everything is going to go to the moon overnight. What it does mean is that the criteria for what matters is changing. And there are possibilities within this framework. And if you're still judging value using old assumptions, then it's going to feel like nothing lines up anymore. Now, I want to address something that really starts to make sense, and it's around what stress does to how value is decided. See, when people talk about markets or finance, they usually talk as if decisions are being made in calm conditions, again, in normal, settled conditions, as if everything is always optimized, rational, or neatly planned out, okay, line upon line. But that's not how real systems behave. And we're starting to see this, that systems don't reveal what they value when everything is working smoothly. They reveal what they value when something breaks. Stress changes the rules. When pressure shows up, whether it's financial, operational, or even structural, systems stop caring about ideas and start caring about outcomes. They stop wondering what's theoretically efficient and they start wondering what actually works right now. You're going to hear me say that a lot because that really is the question. And you have to ask yourself and answer that. That's what you follow. That's an important distinction because a lot of frameworks sound great in theory. They make sense on whiteboards. They make sense in presentations. They make sense when volume is low and conditions are predictable. But stress has a way of exposing which ideas were built for ideal environments and which ones were built for reality. Under stress, priority shifts. Speed matters more than elegance. Reliability matters more than optimization. Certainty matters more than cost. And this isn't unique to finance. This is how humans behave too. When there's no pressure, we make choices based on preference. When there is pressure, we make choices based on necessity. The same logic applies to systems. When liquidity is abundant, when settlement is easy, when nothing is urgent, price feels like the most important variable. And people debate it endlessly. But when timing matters, when friction shows up, when things have to move now, price becomes secondary to function. At that point, value is no longer defined by what something costs, it's defined by what it enables. Can it settle quickly? Can it reduce intermediaries? Can it move value without getting stuck? Can it operate when conditions are unstable? Those questions don't show up on normal days. They show up when something strains the system. And this is why so many people get caught off guard by unexpected revaluations. They assume value changes because people suddenly got emotional or speculative, when in reality, value changed because the environment changed. The system didn't panic, it adapted. And adaptation doesn't care whether the story makes sense to everyone watching from the outside. It only cares about solving the problem in front of it. This is also why it's dangerous to assume that the future will behave like the past just because it's familiar. When underlying conditions shift, like debt levels, settlement speed, global flows, technological capability, the criteria for value shifts with them. And that is the part that people, again, are underestimating. They're still debating value using old reference points while the system is moving towards new ones. Okay. And I don't think it's a matter of it wants to, I think it has to. So then the question is, why is the system even being rebuilt at all? And this is where people usually jump too fast to conclusions. They see new technology, they hear words like tokenization, blockchain, faster settlement, and they assume that this is innovation for innovation's sake. Like someone woke up one day and decided to reinvent finance because it sounded cool. That is not how large systems change. Large systems don't rebuild themselves because they're bored. They rebuild because the old structure can't handle the weight anymore. What's happening right now is not a trend. It's not a preference shift. It's a capacity problem. The volume of value moving through the global financial system has outgrown the infrastructure that was designed decades ago. Settlement takes too long. Too many intermediaries are involved. Too much capital gets trapped waiting for transactions to clear. And under normal circumstances, that inefficiency is tolerated. But under stress, that inefficiency becomes a liability, a huge liability. When things need to move quickly, when risk spikes, when trust tightens, the system doesn't ask, is this elegant? It asks, can this settle? And it's that simple. That is the lens that makes everything else make sense. It's also why faster rails suddenly matter, why real-time settlement matters, why reducing intermediaries matters. why transparency starts to outweigh comfort. This is also where the idea of tokenization comes from. It's not a buzzword, but as a response. Tokenization isn't about turning everything into a coin. I know some people think that. It's about making ownership, transfer, and settlement programmable instead of manual. It's about taking something that already exists, a bond, a stock, a claim, and allowing it to move through the system with less friction and more certainty. And this is the part that I want to stress. When systems scale, they do not become more flexible, they become more brittle unless the infrastructure underneath them changes. That's why the financial system keeps running into moments where everything feels fine until it isn't. And when those moments happen, the system doesn't wait for public understanding or consensus again. It just moves towards solutions that reduce pressure, even if those solutions feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar at first. And this is why we're seeing changes that don't look dramatic on the surface, but they are actually foundationally. And it's not about replacing money overnight. It's not about eliminating banks. It's about giving the system a way to function at the scale it has already reached. Once you see that, the story in your mind starts to shift. This isn't a narrative about disruption. It is a narrative about adaptation, and adaptation always favors what works under pressure, not what sounds good, again, in theory. Now, if this way of thinking starts to resonate with you a bit, where I'm pulling you out of hype and I'm trying to just lay a solid foundation of sobriety and help you to understand why the system behaves the way it does, this is exactly the kind of framework that is worked through in Stock Up University. It's not about chasing all these headlines and getting your emotions all ramped up. It's really about learning how money moves, how markets respond to stress, how cycles work, and how to read what the system is signaling before it becomes obvious. Now, if you ever felt like you're late to narratives but early to confusion, that is usually a literacy problem, not an intelligence problem. And Stock Up University is where you build that literacy. And just so you know, the pricing is changing when we go over into the new year. So if you want to access it at the current rate with the discount, then use the code EARN before it's not available. The link is in the description. Now, I want to go into this idea of where value migrates when settlement matters. Okay, so we talked about the stress and the infrastructure, but this is where the idea of value really sharpens itself. When systems are under pressure, value doesn't scatter randomly, it moves into a very specific direction. It migrates towards whatever reduces friction. And this doesn't sound exciting, obviously. This doesn't sound theoretically optimal, but it's not supposed to. We're looking at what actually allows the system to keep functioning. And this is why historically, moments of stress tend to expose what was always important but easy to ignore. You see, on normal days, you can tolerate all the delays, you can layer complexity on top of complexity and pretend it's fine. But on stress days, all of that becomes painfully obvious. Settlement delays matter, counterparty risk matter, liquidity being trapped matters. And suddenly the system starts prioritizing things it used to overlook. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not overlooking any of this stuff anymore. And I'm hoping that you start to at least do your due diligence and research what's really happening. This is a time where you're going to start to see a shift away from the narrative value and towards functional value. Functional value is very simple. Can it settle? Can it move value without waiting? Can it do so reliably even when conditions are unstable? This is also where you see people get confused and think something came out of nowhere. This doesn't come out of nowhere. It may feel like it came out of nowhere because you haven't been looking for it, but nothing comes out of nowhere. The groundwork is already laid. It's quiet, it's behind the scenes. You got to look for it. The revaluation only feels sudden because most people weren't watching the criteria that actually drive it. And I'm sharing this because we may see some things in 2026 where you think it came out of nowhere, but the groundwork has been laid. And this is the subtle part that's very important for you to understand. When value migrates this way, it doesn't wonder whether the move feels fair or intuitive to everyone observing it. It just responds again. There's this word necessity. There's a necessity. There's a necessity. That's why you can have moments where something that felt irrelevant yesterday becomes very critical today. And it is not because opinions have changed. It is because requirements have changed. This is also why I'm careful when people say that doesn't make sense. A lot of things don't make sense until you understand the problem they're solving. If you're still evaluating value using comfort era logic, these shifts are going to feel random. If you're evaluating value through the lens of settlement and reliability, they start to look inevitable. And this is the transition I think we're in right now. Not from one asset to another, not from old money to new money, but from a system that rewarded appearance and abstraction to one that increasingly rewards what works when pressure is applied. So, what does this mean for how you think? Not what you buy, but how you think. If there's one thing that I hope lands, it is this. This moment is not about chasing outcomes. That's all people want to do. They want to chase the outcomes and they want to do it overnight. It's not about that. It's about understanding what the system is rewarding right now. When the measuring stick is unstable, reacting to price alone is one of the fastest ways to stay confused. You end up arguing about numbers instead of noticing that the criteria themselves are changing. You got to reroute how you're looking at things and you got to refocus if you really want to stay ahead of this game. What I'm paying attention to isn't what's always the loudest. It is what the system is quietly leaning on when things get tight. Because systems don't lie under stress. They reveal priorities. They're revealing them. They reveal what they trust. They reveal what they depend on. They reveal what they need to keep moving. And once you see that, your behavior naturally changes. You stop waiting for the conclusion that everybody else has, the consensus. You stop needing everything to be obvious and you stop reacting emotionally to every move or what everybody is predicting or saying. And I'm not saying this so that you can try to haughty yourself above someone, but I want you to really understand the lens that you're using should be very different than the ones you probably are using. And this is why I don't frame this as being too early or too late. Those labels only make sense if nothing is changing underneath. But when the rules of value formation are shifting, the real divide isn't timing, it's understanding. Some people will keep arguing about whether something makes sense based on how things used to work. And others are going to just quietly adjust how they interpret signals because they recognize that the environment itself has changed. And that's the difference between feeling like the world is chaotic and everybody is off about their predictions or maybe right about their predictions or whatever that is. And you stop all of that and you start realizing that it's actually reorganizing. There's something deeper coming and 2026 is going to reveal it. If this way of thinking resonates with you, if you're the kind of person who wants structure, clarity, and a real framework instead of all this noise, that's actually what my coaching program ecosystem is all about. It's built for you. If this is you, we talk about the markets, but we don't end there. We work on how you think, how you plan, how you position, and how you stay grounded while everything around you may feel unstable. And I know it's like that because that's what transition feels like. But going into the new year, I am restructuring and upgrading everything, deeper support, clearer frameworks, more real-time guidance. And because of that, the pricing is going to be changing after the new year. So if you are thinking about joining, this is your window. The link is in the description. And if this conversation added any value to you, please go ahead and like the video. It does help the video. And subscribe if you haven't already so we can stay connected. I do want to hear from you. Were you disappointed this year on price action? And regardless how you feel, I still want you to always stay wise, stay wealthy, and I'll see you in the next one.